and welcome back. Today we're going to go over Form Creator again. Please make sure you have watched the previous videos. Today we are going to go into some advanced form creation, things like calculations, conditional logic. So it's very important that you have already watched the previous training videos or this really will not make sense. As you can see, I'm already in the form that I created in those previous videos. We're going to go ahead and add a couple calculations and conditional logic here as good examples. Now, I just want to point out to go through everything in one training meeting would be entirely way too long. So there's a lot of advanced things in here. Some are very obvious on how to set them up. It gives you a very good explanation of exactly how to input, to make this particular thing work, like default value, very easy to use. It's, numbers are currency and you can default it. And it's, very obvious that you put a 0 if you want it to default to 0. So those things I'm not going to show you today. I do recommend, though, when you are trying anything that is advanced, that you do it individually. So remember, the preview in the form creator does not show you if what you did works properly. You have to have this form set up in a funding opportunity and you have to test it. You have to test it properly. Okay, so I have done that already. I have an application ready to test this application form. As you're doing these advanced items, do them one at a time. Go check and make sure it works. At least until you get really good at it, you're going to get to where you're super, great with all this stuff. Then maybe you don't have to test each individual one. But as you're learning, if you would say, let's say we're going to use all of these items under the field value properties, some of these aren't meant to work together. You use them, one at a time. And so you can create an issue within your form, and you're not going to know which one had the issue because you did 4 things all at one time. So do them a little bit at a time as you learn. Again, some of these are really simple. It's just a matter of reading the instructions. This is temporary text that you can have displayed in the field. Very easy to use, not complicated. Today I'm going over the complicated items, mainly focusing on calculations and conditional logic. Okay, so I'm going to get out of this particular field and kind of talk about what I want to do with this form. So first, I have asked the applicant to tell me how many people they've served between these age ranges, right? So they're entering numbers here. Well, let's say I also ask, maybe in a separate area, how much, funding it costs to serve these people. And so then I want to take the amount that they're paying per person and take it times how many people they serve. That's a calculation. And in fact, it's a more complicated calculation because I'm going to pull numbers from 2 different sections. So we're going to do that. And then another one would be conditional logic. Conditional logic is where you can conditionally require or even conditionally show, so things can come in and out of you, a question depending on a previous answer. Conditional logic only works within the same section. So I can't ask a question up here and then make a field down here up here. It's a field within the same section. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and add my currency question, which is how much per person. And then that way they can answer how much funding it takes per person to serve these people. And then later down in this section, I ask them how many they served. So I have to have my fields on here first. So I'm going to click Add. How much does the program spend per person served? Let's say how much. Okay, so this would be currency. So my data type is currency. So if I am going to have another question or calculation in this case that's dependent on this, I should require it, right? And that calculation is going to be 0 if they don't fill this out. So I'm going to go ahead and require this, and this is an open entry. So what they'll do is they will enter the amount here, and then they'll enter how many they're serving here, and then I can put the total maybe in a different section. Maybe I want it right underneath this one. So it just depends on where you're putting it. The important thing with your syntax, your actual calculation that you're going to write, is if you're working within the same section, and I'm not, I have a field in this section and then a field in a totally different section, then I have to tell it the section reference names. But if you're working within the same section, so if I had the number served in here, then I'm working within the same section. I don't have to provide the system with the section reference names. So I'll show you a little bit harder one, and I have to add my total field first. So I'm going to go ahead and add it up here and say total amount. Again, it would be currency. When you do a calculation, you do the data type to whatever data type you want to display. So if you're doing, I see like a calculation of percentage of match on a budget a lot. You want to see, if you're requesting match or require match, you want to see out of the total budget, you know, how much of it is match. Well, that's a percentage. So then your data type would be percentage, and then you would go write your calculation. So it's whatever is going to be displayed, and mine will be currency. I'm asking for a total amount. So take the amount per individual times the amount of people and give me a total. Okay, so I have my field ready to go. Now I have to write this calculation. Well, first, before I can actually write the calculation, I have to identify the actual fields. And we do not use the label. We use the database field name, and it has to be identical. So that's why I saved first instead of just going in there and writing the calculation. I have to know the database field name. And this one happens to be, this one is how much the program spent per person. This one is in the same section as my calculation, so I don't need the section reference name. I just need that database field name. But then I want it to go to a different section entirely, right? So that's where I need the section reference name. So if I show you in my total amount, which is where we're going to do the calculation, I go down here and look at this calculation box, it does give me an example. It gives me a sample. This one here is just field 1 plus field 2. I'll go ahead and put that in here so you can see it a little better. This is just a simple adding calculation, but you could times it too or divide it, whatever. But this is telling me when I look at this that these fields exist within the section this field is in. This total field is in the same section. If you see this one, I'm going to wipe this out. This syntax will literally get me the same results that this one is. It's just asking me to add two fields, together. That's it. But what this one has different is we have section references first, then a period, then the field name. That means that field is not located in the same section as this calculation. Okay, so that's that example up there. I just wanted to explain it a little bit better. So for the first one's easy. It was right in the same section as my calculated field. It's right here. You have to get this identical. So I really stress that you copy and paste them. You can type them. I'm not saying it has to be pasted in, but if you would type in how much and use that, but you don't capitalize the M in much, that actually doesn't exist, right? So that is an example of a user-defined error. It will not calculate because that lowercase m is not accurate. The system's going to go look for exactly what you put in there, and that doesn't exist. So that's why I recommend you copy and paste. So I'm going to go into the total amount field in my calculation. I'm going to say how much. That's my database field name, and it's within the same section, so I don't need my reference name. Well, what do I want it to do? I want to take it times how many, right? So now I'm going to go get my how many. Well, my how many is in a different section, right? My how many served. So now I have to go and basically tell the system what section I want it to go to. That's the section reference name. So if I edit the section properties, this is what the original screen looked like when we added this section and named it. If I come down here, you'll see that the system created this section reference name. It also has a database table name. What the system needs for a calculation is the section reference name. So I'm going to copy that. That one you really do have to copy. Come back into my total amount. Sometimes this is really handy to have two tabs open, so I could be pasting and not have to come back in each time. I'm going to do it on one screen to make sure you're seeing it correctly on the video. So now I've said take how much from this section times, I haven't identified a field yet, I've given it a section reference. And when you do a section reference, you have to put a period and then define the field. So what field within that section? Well, there's actually only one field. So I'm going to go click on that and get this database field name. Go back to my total amount, and now my calculation will actually be finished, right? Had I left that the way it was, it wouldn't have produced anything. It may have actually produced an error because I didn't fully finish that. So I have to finish it out. And this is just saying this field happens to be located in a different section. So go to this section and then find this field. So it's going to take how much times how many cert. Okay, so that's a calculation. And I am going to go to my application and test this. But first I'm going to add a couple other things before we go test it. Now this is a special note just for any admin out there. This same syntax is what you use for a contract template. So if you've ever used contracts in the system and you've developed a contract template, you know that template has your static language, right? But then you have these items in brackets, and it's kind of like a mel merge where you would like mel merge and actually brings that data in from the grant specifically, so that contract ends up being very specific for that grant. Those are set up the same way. So let me show you an example, and it'll kind of bring this together because it's the same way. Your section reference, then a period, then the field. So let me pull up a contract. Okay, so I've got the contract pulled up, and this is just an example contract. Contract training was actually part of the subcomponent training in phase 4, but this is how you do those substitutions. So a lot of these substitutions are provided if they're system forms, like the people and org forms are system forms, meaning you didn't create them in the form creator yourself. But there's a lot of times where we want to take this contract and we do want to pull from user-defined forms that we built. Keep in mind that the contract cannot pull from application forms. It only pulls from the grant because the contract exists as a grant subcomponent. So it will pull in grant forms. Now don't worry, you probably linked your application forms to the grant, therefore creating grant forms. Just make sure you're in the grant version of the form. But this is as simple as that calculation I just did. You get the section reference name, a period, then the field name, and then it will populate. Once you pull this template into a grant, it will populate this information. This happens to be a system form, so those substitutions, like I said, they're provided down here and really easy. But maybe in the middle of your contract, you want to put like the scope of work of that project. And you could say scope of work and then actually put a substitution and go to your grant form, get the section reference name and get the scope of work field name. And that's how you do it. So I just wanted to quickly show you that it's the same exact format as this calculation. You just tell it where to go. And it has to be a grant form for a contract. But that's how you write up those calculations. They can get complicated. So this is a little bit advanced. I've gone to a different section. They can get more complicated than this. If you're having it do more than one thing, like for example, doing a percentage, you first have to like add all the categories of the budget. And then you're adding match plus your awarded amount, and then you're dividing, and you're doing multiple things. So you would have it do the first function, and in parentheses. So the first function, if I was going to add to this and go, okay, well, I want you to take how much times how many served first, I put that in parentheses. And then the next would be, then I want you to add and do my next thing. So it would take this and get this number first, then add, you know, if I had filled 1 in here, again, it has to exist. So this is an example. Then it would add that second to this calculation first. So you do have to do the order using parentheses. One thing you can't do is an if then, and you also can't like reject it based on a calculation. The calculation is always true, it will always display. So reject probably isn't the right word, but if you have, so let's say you have added maybe some validation where it has to be equal to or less than a certain amount. You can't do that when you've also told it to calculate. It'll produce an error or it won't work because you've told it to calculate, and the calculation always is going to show you the true calculation. So if you take how many served times the amount, and let's say it equals to 6,000, but you've gone in a validation and said it has to be below 5,000, it's not, right? The validation down here is when it's an open entry and you're having the user enter an amount, and that amount can't be over 5,000. That's, again, an example, and it has a good syntax for you to follow as an example. But you can't do that to a calculation. You can't say, well, I want you to calculate this, but then not calculate, you know, and not get an answer above 5,000. Well, it's just going to calculate and give you the exact calculation. Again, it doesn't do if-then logic. If this, then calculate this. If that, then do some other calculation. You can get a little fancy with it, though, by making multiple fields that do different calculations and make, you know, some conditional logic on your other fields. That's pretty complicated. Try to keep your forms manageable to where, you know, next year when you come in or someone else has to come in and update these forms or use them, you know, they can understand what's going on. It's not so complicated that it's almost custom and can't even be touched. Try to keep that in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm done with this calculation. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And then when I'm in here, I'm going to add some conditional logic. So a lot of times conditional logic that I found is based on like a yes, no, or a drop down where you're given options and then you have this other. You know, other is an option in the box that they are allowed to utilize. And so if they click other, then you want to pop up a text box where they can describe other. So I'm going to go ahead and use my my colors here, and I'm going to put other in this list, and then I'm going to come back and go, okay, well, if other, please describe. So I'm going to quickly go add other to my list. Here's my drop down. I'm adding my new option, other. Again, if you're using a conditional logic for a dropdown, you're going to use the code, not the label. In this case, they were exactly the same, so it, you know, it seems like it doesn't matter. But a lot of times your label will be longer than your code. It is the code, not the label. So I'm adding other. This happens to be in a reference table too. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my reference table and update that really quick. I just added a new option. So I want other to actually appear for all 3 of my parent choices. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. No matter what, they have the option for other. Okay. So let's go. I have to redo my preview here now that I've added a new option. So red. I see they have other. Now I could have put that down at the bottom of my drop down, so it's at the bottom. Most people would put other at the bottom. You can alphabetize your drop downs too. No matter what I select, I've got this other. Okay, well, what if they select other? Do we want them to define that further and get a text box? We can. So again, you need the code for that choice. And again, think bigger than, you know, the colors I've shown you. Again, a lot of this will be based on project type and the categories and things that they're doing within their project, and you've provided them a list, but maybe you haven't come up with all the things they could do in their project. So then you say, other, and then they describe it further. That's a good, example here. So I'm going to pop up a box, and it's only going to show for the other option. So first I have to add it, to add my question. And it's usually, if other, please describe, we'll say. I'm going to change this to other description. Now this, again, is a pretty common example, but you can do it off of like a yes, no. Does this qualify? Yes, no. If no, tell me why it doesn't. Conditional reject is a lot of times used. I'll show you conditional reject. It's a different kind of conditional logic that's really handy to use too. But this example is pretty common where we've given them drop-down choices. So I add my question first, and it's just going to be, I'm not even going to change it to a bigger box. I'm just going to leave it as a regular text box, and that's it. I have to add my conditional logic, but I create the field first. The big thing to notice is don't require it. What conditional logic is going to do is pop this in and out of view. So basically hide it from a lot of people. If people don't click other, then this question will be hidden from them. You cannot hide required fields, right? This required right here is red. It makes it red. It should be displayed on the page at all times. You can't make it conditional if it's required. What happens is the user can't see it. If they didn't pick other, they couldn't see it because you're hiding it. But it's required, which means they won't be able to mark their form as complete. So don't ever make a field conditional that's required. You can make it conditionally required. So I am going to go ahead and just click save. Now I've kind of got it in a weird order. I added my colors first, and then I got these amounts going on. So another nice feature here is this edit all fields. Instead of individually reordering these, I can edit all fields. It opens them all up. And I can say, maybe I want my how much and my total to be up at the top with my scope of work. And then I want to get my colors questions all together and get them like that. That order is going to make a little bit more sense. So I'm asking them their color, a more specific color, and if they say other, they have to describe. So that's going to make more sense. I haven't added conditional logic, so it's just showing on the page at all times. But I like to preview it to make sure it's ordered correctly, and I like it. All right, so now let's make it work. So we have to have everything exist before we can have this conditional logic. All right. I am going to figure out what this is dependent on. Which field is this dependent on? Is other up here or is other down here? Other is in this field. And this is the dropdown that I added other to. So this is the database field name. So I'm basically going to go tell the system, if they say other in this field, and this is the field I named, then I want you to pop up this new field. So I have to copy this database field name. Okay. Go in to my conditional field. That's my other description. And I'm saying, okay, I want this field to pop up. That's conditional show, where it pops in and out of view, and it gives you the syntax. We're going to do the same thing. So I'm having this field pop up if this field, which is be more specific, is equal to, and then you put your code. Right? Well, my code was in my dropdown. So other. Okay, so I'm going to blow this up. That's gonna scrunch everything here. But my example in my instructions says field name in brackets, 2 equal signs, and then whatever that code is to the answer. So this example was a yes, no. And then you have your apostrophes up here. So I've done the same thing here. Okay, So what you have to understand is conditional show just makes it come in and out of view. It does not require it. So most of the time you'll use these together. Not all the time, but most of the time you'll say, well, if I'm, want them to describe if they click other, I'm going to pop it in if they say other, but I also want it to be required based on the same condition. But these two will work independently. You don't have to use them together. This not only pulls it into view, but it also requires it if they say other. Same syntax. However, I could go like this, where I just use conditional required, which means this question, if other please describe, it'll always show on the screen. It never moves in and out of view because I'm not using conditional show. But it's only required if they select other in this question. So a lot of times you'll see just conditional required used independently. Majority of the time when you're conditionally showing, you'll want to use both. But I've seen a couple scenarios where they want it to go in and out of view, but it's still not required. It's just encouraged, I guess would be the better way to explain it. I'm seeing a lot of people just go like this with their forms, though. They do both. Okay, so that's some basic conditional logic. Now, I do want to go ahead and do a conditional reject. That's something I see used a lot. Sometimes it scares people. They're like, no, I don't want to reject an application. I can't do that. It's not actually going to like reject it and like not, like put their application in like rejected status or anything like that. It's not that crazy, but we call it conditional reject. What it does is it pops up a box for them. So it's based on a certain answer, is your project located within, whatever state, and it's your state. Well, if they say no, a lot of times the project has to be located in that state. And so no, it doesn't take their application out of the process, but what it does is it'll pop up a box and say, based on requirements, it's whatever you want it to say, but your project is not eligible because it's outside the state of whatever. You can make that happen. And then from there, what happens to them is they can just change their answer. They may have clicked it accidentally, or it may make them stop and withdraw their application. That way you're not getting all these applications that aren't eligible. But they could change their answer. So, if it's the state, they probably need to withdraw because it doesn't apply. But it was some other question, like, based on project type, and it has to be, a specific one. You could give them this pop-up and go, oh, okay, I need to do this other type or something like that. So it's not that harsh. It just helps guide them, and it really helps you with your eligibility. So I'm going to reject this application based on the color red. So if they select red, then it's going to give them a pop-up. So I'm going to actually go in to this and add my conditional reject. Okay, so the reason why this is a little bit more complicated is these two things work together, so you have to do both. But the concept is still the same. You need to put the field and then the code. Now, my message, again, I'm doing a silly one where I'm going to reject it based on red. So I'm going to do my message. This is the pop-up they're going to get. So I'm just going to say red is not an eligible option for this opportunity. That's the pop-up. You should describe clearly why it's not eligible. Okay, so what question? Well, it's the favorite color question. So I'm going to go conditional reject on this field, and then what answer? So see how my syntax is looking the same? And that was red. Again, you should copy and paste your database field names. Red is simple enough, but it has a capital R. Definitely go verify that in your dropdown. And now I'm going to go test. So I already have an application ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and go pull that application up and test and make sure everything is working properly. Okay, so now I'm in my application. I'm ready to test. Here's my form. So calculations only work after you've clicked save. So I have already been in this form already and added how many people I served, it's a total of 7. When I click edit and I start entering like the amount, it's not going to automatically calculate. The calculations happen on save. So I'm going to go ahead and say, well, it cost $1,000 per person. And then that's my calculation that'll show. Now my favorite color, that's the reject. So if I say red, then I navigate off of that, that's where that pop-up comes in. So it's red is not an eligible option for this opportunity. Now, as you can see, it didn't kick me out of my application, right? I can come in here and select something different. Now my conditional logic, notice I don't have that question appearing where it says if other, right? So this is, if I select the mustard, nothing happens. But if I select other, that's when I get this if other, please describe. That's that conditional logic. Note that your conditionally required fields are not red because they're not required all the time. But the box, see how that box just turned red? Or if I tried to save, it's going to tell me that it's required based on the condition, right? So put some good instructions on those, make sure they understand. But I could save if I didn't pick other. Now let's see, I just saved, did it work? So did my calculation work? Yep, it took 1,000 times the 7. And that worked. And I can change around some things here, make sure everything's working. I added quite a bit, but make sure you test properly. Oh, I did red again, we'll do blue. Other, save. And again, a proper test is completing all of it, making sure you can mark it as complete and submit it in. Again, that mark as complete looks for required fields. And if you accidentally hid one, you can't mark it as complete. So do a thorough test before you put your form out there and go live with it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps. Thank you for watching.